It is 1873. You are 18 years old. You are wearing the most expensive dress your family has ever purchased. And you have no idea what is about to happen to you. Not tonight. Not in that room. Not in that bed. Your mother sat with you this morning. The closest thing to a conversation you would ever have about marriage. She held your hands. She looked away. She said 3 words that were supposed to prepare you for the rest of your life. Endure it, dear. Yes, madame. Not. That was all. That was everything. That was the entire inheritance one generation passed to the next. Not wisdom, not warning, not truth. Just endurance. As if marriage were a storm, you simply waited out. As if your body, your consent, your confusion were beside the point entirely. You are about to walk into a world where the law does not recognize you as a person. Where the church calls submission a virtue. Where doctors have written papers, published, cited, respected, claiming that women do not experience desire at all. You have been prepared for embroidery, for silence, for the correct angle of a curtsy. You have not been prepared for tonight. To understand what is happening to you, you have to understand the world you were born into. Victorian England operates on a principle so deeply embedded that no one questions it. A woman's ignorance is her greatest asset. Not her intelligence, not her strength, her ignorance. The less she knows about her own body, the more virtuous she is considered. This is not a metaphor. This is medical doctrine. In 1857, physician William Acton published one of the most widely circulated medical texts of the era. His conclusion stated plainly, "The majority of women are not very much troubled with sexual feeling of any kind." The book ran through multiple editions. Doctors read it, clergymen quoted it, mothers believed it. You grew up in a world shaped by that sentence. The church reinforced it differently. Intimacy within marriage was not pleasure, it was duty. A wife's role was not to want, but to comply. And knowledge itself was treated as contamination. Girls who asked questions were redirected. Girls who read the wrong books were corrected. Girls who knew too much were considered unsuitable for marriage. There is also a class dimension you may not have noticed. Working-class women, pressed into factories and fields since childhood, often knew far more about the realities of the body than their upper-class counterparts. The ignorance being sold as virtue was a luxury only the wealthy could afford to perform. Today we call this a systemic failure. In 1873, they called it civilization. You have spent months preparing for this wedding. Restrictive corsets worn daily until your ribcage shifted. Smelling salts carried at all times. Fainting was not weakness, it was fashion. An entire trousseau embroidered by hand. Sheets, pillowcases, nightgowns, table linens. Everything beautiful. Everything for a life you had not yet been told the truth about. The ceremony is tomorrow. The dress fits perfectly. You still don't know what endure it means. The wedding is over. The church smelled of candle wax and wet wool. You stood beside a man you have known for 14 months. Chaperoned every visit, never alone, never allowed a conversation that wasn't observed. You said, "I will obey." He did not say that word. The vows were not the same for both of you, and you knew it. And you said nothing, because what was there to say? The breakfast afterward was a performance. Relatives toasting, women complimenting your dress, men speaking to your husband about his plans, his land, his finances, his future. Your future was assumed to be the same as his. Legally, it now was. Under the Married Women's Property Act of 1870, passed just 3 years ago, you could, for the first time, keep wages you earned yourself. Before that, Everything you owned transferred to him the moment you said, "I will." Everything. Your jewelry, your savings, your clothes. Legally, they were his. The 1870 Act was a crack in the wall. But the wall was still standing. At the breakfast, you smiled. You performed exactly what the room required. Inside, something that had been building for months. Since your mother's 3 words, since the corset fittings, since the night you lay awake wondering what you hadn't been told. Sat in your chest like a stone. Your husband is not cruel. That is what you keep telling yourself. He simply expects what every man of his era was raised to expect. Would you have wanted to know the truth before the wedding? Type 1. Or do you think the ignorance was, in some ways, a mercy? Type 2. Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you think. Let me tell you what the bridal chamber actually looked like in 1873. Not the version in novels, the real one. Coal smoke had settled into the curtains over years, a faint, permanent darkness in the fabric that no amount of airing removed. The room smelled of it. Underneath that, something earthier, bodies that had not bathed in days, because indoor plumbing was not yet standard even in middle-class homes. A chamber pot beneath the bed, straw in the mattress. And in many households, bedbugs, not a sign of poverty. Simply a sign of the era. This was the room your wedding night was happening in. There was no conversation beforehand. No one had told you what to expect. Not your mother, not your doctor, not your church. What happened in that room was not discussed. It was not named. It was absorbed in silence and filed away as something women carried alone. Historians who have studied Victorian marriage, including John R. Gillis in For Better, For Worse, document that the shock of the wedding night was not exceptional. It was ordinary. Repeated across households, across decades, across social classes. Women wrote about it in private diaries that were later found and preserved. The language they used was careful, oblique, but the meaning was clear. Something happened to you that you were not prepared for, and when morning came, you were expected to pour the tea. The legal framework made one thing absolute. Once married, a wife could not refuse her husband. Not legally. Not in 1873. Marital rape would not be criminalized in England until 1991. 118 years from where you are standing right now. That number should stop you cold. Here is what the long term looked like. Domestic life in a Victorian marriage meant running a household with precision. Managing servants if you were wealthy, managing alone if you were not. Menus planned, budgets stretched. Children arriving, on average, a Victorian woman bore 5 to 6 children, with no reliable contraception and significant risk of death in each birth. The maternal mortality rate in England in the 1870s was approximately 5 per 1,000 births. That number sounds small until you understand it compounded across 6 pregnancies. Your body was the site of work you had no language to name. The physical toll was documented, quietly, in medical journals, in the notes of sympathetic physicians who began, slowly, to ask different questions. Annie Besant and Charles Bradlaugh were prosecuted in 1877 for distributing a pamphlet about birth control. They were convicted. The conviction was later overturned. But the fact of the prosecution tells you everything about how threatening that knowledge was considered. Information about the body, prosecuted as obscenity. And yet, change was beginning. Not with fanfare, not with legislation, not yet. With architecture. In the 1880s and 1890s, something subtle started shifting in the design of middle-class homes, separate bedrooms. More homes began building them. More couples began using them. It was never stated directly. It was expressed as preference, as comfort, as practicality. But what it actually was the first negotiation. Women were finding ways, small, quiet, structurally invisible ways, to reclaim space. Not freedom, not yet, but distance. The distance between two beds in separate rooms was, in 1885, a revolutionary act performed in silence. That is what endurance looks like when it cannot speak yet. It rearranges the furniture. It closes a door. It breathes. Here is what history does not often say about Victorian women. They were not passive. They were precise. Within the constraints of a world that had stripped them of legal personhood, financial independence, and bodily autonomy, they built. They ran households that functioned as small economies. They educated their children.
Year did the Queen ascend to the throne?
They corresponded in letters that traveled across continents. They read. They organized. They founded charitable societies that quietly accumulated political influence. The suffragette movement did not emerge from nowhere in 1903. It emerged from decades of women who had been enduring, observing, and slowly, methodically, building the infrastructure of resistance inside the only spaces they were allowed to occupy. Your mother told you to endure it. What she could not tell you, because she did not know it yet, was that endurance was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much longer one. The Married Women's Property Act of 1882 finally gave wives full ownership of their own property. The Matrimonial Causes Act expanded grounds for divorce. Each year, the wall cracked a little more. And the women who came after you, your daughters, your granddaughters, would live in a world shaped by every quiet act of survival you performed in rooms no one was watching. History remembers revolutions. It rarely remembers the women who made tea the morning after their wedding night and decided, quietly, that this was not the whole story. But I remember. If this made you think about something you hadn't considered before, drop it in the comments. I want to hear from you. What surprised you most about what life was really like for a Victorian bride? If this video added something to how you see history, please like it. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about the real stories. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of history. Not the kings and the battles, but the lives that happened underneath. And if you know someone who loves history, or someone who should, share this with them. These stories deserve more than silence. Thank you for watching. Genuinely.